We're away. Okay, cool. So some of you guys are already going to know what I'm talking about for some of it. Some of you guys, this is going to be brand new. So what we'll do for the next couple of weeks is we will look at Logic, and then we'll look at Ableton, and then we'll look at Pro Tools, and we'll do the same principles in all of them. So what we're going to do is, I think we'll get round to that at the end. The reason I'm doing this with you all today is because of you guys, some of you guys being in isolation, me being ill, me having to cover lessons. I feel like I've missed a couple of sessions with some of you groups, so I think that's why we're all going to do it in one class today, just so you're all up to speed and you're all up to the same level. And because I've been taking you in your studio sessions, and all of you guys have been so productive in those sessions, I think every band has recorded in those sessions over the last 2 weeks has been able to. You can now take those recordings home with you, and you can get them into your DAWs, and you can start to play around with them in the way I'm going to show you guys now. So this is the arrange view. This is where you're looking at your music going from left to right, and this is how we record it. When I push Command 2 and I'll drag it over so you can see it, this is your mix view. So this is like your mixing desk view. So what you're seeing here is a representation of what you are seeing here. When I click on this kick track, it represents this kick drum track here, so on, so on, so on. So the very first thing that I will do when I'm about to start on a project is I will initiate my gain staging. So gain staging is just making sure that we are sort of at a correct level of signal from our individual tracks before we begin any kind of processing. It's just like a little standardization check that we're going to do before we do anything else. Ignore that one, that's me talking there, we could ignore that for now. So we're just going to play the track and just the music for now, and I'm just going to drop us into a little heavy bit, and we're just going to see what the levels are doing. Good. So some things are a little bit louder than others. Oh, you don't see the mix view. Is it not coming in front of you guys now? I'll tell you what, if you're not seeing the mix view, I'll just bring it up like that. Can you see the mix view now? Excellent, we're back in business. So you can bring this mix view up as a separate screen, and you just push Command 2, but because we're doing like a screen capture and I'm sending my screen to you, we might not have that luxury. So we'll just work like this if this works for everyone. Excellent, it does. So let's just pull this guy right up to the top so we can see what we're doing. And I'm just going to, because when I worked with these guys when they were recording, and I think they'd agree with me that it's sort of like a brooding, building song. So like it's really dynamic, which is fantastic. I'm just going to loop by clicking in this bar. I'm just looping this yellow section here. And I haven't really even dropped the vocals in yet. We'll get to those in a minute. I'm just going to hear what the instruments are doing in this heavy section. Good. The first thing you'll notice over here on our stereo out is how much headroom we have. Let's play again. I keep clicking it just to reduce it, just to keep seeing where our sort of headroom's peaking at there. -6.8. That's fantastic for now. What I'm going to do, first thing I'm going to do, is I just want to give the kick drum a little bit more energy. Now what you'll see that I've done here is you can actually, if you think that a signal is particularly quiet or particularly loud, for example, look at this overhead we have here. We're not going to use that one, but it's quite a large waveform, especially when you compare it to the overheads here. There's a better example. So we were rushing around, we were trying to record things quickly. We were trying to get stuff down. We didn't have the luxury of checking every signal level. So it seems like this overhead came in a little bit hot. But what we could just do is take the overhead, come over to our region, click down, and we get all of these options. We could reverse the audio signal if we wanted to. It's very cool, but let's save that for another lesson. We could add fades to our audio signal. Can you see those fades being added in here? So you could have a smoother transition from a quieter section to a louder section. You might do crossfades that way as well. Let's look at that in another lesson. But what I actually want to do here is just show you guys how you can manipulate your audio. So I can turn the gain up. You can see the waveforms going crazy. No dynamic headroom. That would sound horrible. Or I can reduce my waveform down and balance it a little bit more to my overhead on the right. So this is the first thing I'm doing really, is I'm just looking at the waveforms, I'm listening to the waveforms, and I'm sort of gain staging everything and making sure that nothing is coming in too hot on our individual channels, and nothing really is. So let's jump straight in. What would I do first of all? Well, I would set up buses, but I wouldn't set up buses on effects. I would set up buses on instruments. So that's some post coming through the door then, sorry. So we have, for example, 3 snare microphones. Now I will EQ all of them individually, but eventually I need them all to go to the same place. So I am going to send from my stereo outs, and instead of going to output, I'm going to go to bus. And I'll send these on bus 2. And now all of these snare tracks, so I've muted all of the snare tracks that way. I have now got full control over those 3 snare tracks by sending them to bus 2. Bus 2 appears here. Now all of my snare tracks are going through that bus. Well, the main reason I do that is because when you're working with a lot of audio, it can be quite time consuming to have to do all of those individual tweaks, and it's also a great way to sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a great way to sort of make your life easier basically by taking multiple tracks, and then you only have to sort of work on them in their bus forms, not in their individual forms. So for example, I would send my rack toms, let's send those to bus 3. So bus 3. Let's label them now. So snare bus, tom bus, I'm going to make my snare track mono because that's going to go down the middle, but I'm going to make my tom bus stereo because I want the panning information to go across. So we'll put the rack tom 30 on the left, and we'll put the floor tom, I don't know, 40 on the right. That's my personal preference. I like to do my drums from the drummer's perspective, because whenever I'm with drummers listening to music, we're always imaginary drumming along around the kit. So it's just a personal preference, to be perfectly honest with you. And the rack toms go on that side, so I'm going to pan my overheads as well. So we've got our snare bus, we've got our tom bus. I might as well set up a kick bus anyway, just so that they're all in the same place. So let's put that one on bus 1. Bearing in mind, I know it's only one mic, but normally I would have 2 or 3 mics on. I would have 2 or 3 mics on a kick drum, so we might as well have that one as well. Kick bus. So yeah, normally I would have 2 or 3 mics going into that. So we've got a snare bus, tom bus, kick bus. So gonna let me grab that. Bear with me. And then we will move on to our hi-hats. So actually I don't need to be soloing these. Cool. So let's put our hi-hat onto our next bus. So we'll go bus 4. And I'm going to send my overheads there as well. So I might put my hi-hat slightly over here for now. And then I'm going to put my overheads. These 2 guys are also going to go to bus 4. You can see they're being labelled as we go now. I'm annoyed. Normally I would have my kick before the snare, but I've forgotten what to do to grab it because I'm working on Pro Tools and Ableton and Logic, and I'm getting a little bit confused by things, but we will get there. So we've got our kick bus, tom bus, snare bus, and then we've got our overheads and our highs bus. You might want to have a separate highs bus to a separate overhead bus. Sometimes I like to put 2 mics on a hi-hat, but just for the purposes of this demonstration, we'll send them all there. So if we mute everything else, so you guys are still hearing me when I don't solo it, aren't you? That's cool. Let's mute everything else bar the drums. And now you guys will hopefully see what I mean. So all of our drums are coming through here. And now I've muted all of our drums. So it's just a great way of now working with audio. We're not really necessarily having to look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 drum tracks. Now we're looking at 4 drum tracks. So if you can imagine when you're multi-micing guitars, say you had 3 mics on each guitar, it would be better that you eventually, of course you can EQ and treat those and compress those mics individually if you wish, but eventually you want to send those 3 guitars to one bus. Let's do it with this, for example. We'll send both guitars to the same stereo bus. We'll treat them in the same way because tonally, because the guys had really thought about their guitar tones when they recorded them, they sound really separated. So let's just send them to the same bus. If you guys are cool with it, I was going to lay down like a bass track like at home for this song like this week, so next week we could like do some bass, but if you guys want to do it, you can do it as well. As long as we've got bass for next week, it would be wicked for the next lesson. So again, I'm changing my stereo outs and I'll go to the next bus available, which will be bus 5, and then I'm going to label bus 5 guitars. And that needs to be stereo, so that's why we've got the 2 left and rights here, as opposed to the mono kick, which is just 1 there, and the mono snare, which is 1 there. Right, okay. Let me consult my list so I can do this in perfect order for you guys. So yes, I think what I want to do is I just want to add a little bit of gain to that kick drum. I just want it to be popping a little bit more. So I'm going to go into my audio effects and I'm going to go into my utility and I'm going to gain mono. I'm just going to use the gain tool. I just want to give it a little bit more. Lovely. I love kick drums and I love snare drums, so I want to get the most out of them. The next thing I'm going to do is be really enable to turn all of my audio tracks for out of time, so if you could, that would be great. Ben, no problem. We'll get to the bottom of that, Ben, don't worry. Okay, we can always drop the tracks in college, we can drop them into Ableton and we'll work out why they're not in time, so don't worry, we'll get to the bottom of that. Sorry, carrying on here, what I'm going to do is, you guys in Logic have your stock plugins and they're fantastic, and here's the noise gate. I want to put a noise gate on it because we're getting a lot of bleed of the other instruments. I want to separate that kick drum a bit. I want to put a noise gate on it. There's Drawmer noise gates in the studio, so you could do it on the way in, which I have done in the past, but a lot of engineers don't like to gate on the way in because just in case they gated something wrong, there's no going back. Whereas if you noise gate within your DAW, there's when you noise gate in a DAW, there is a chance of you being able to change it. And what I will do is, I know I'm going through so many processes. Along with this video, I'll write out a step-by-step guide of what I'm doing and why. So that will go along with this video, and that will help anybody that's sort of thinking, oh, I just want to know step by step, because I'm like that as well. I need to see it in writing as well as videos. So yeah, Lottie, that's no problem. I will do that. I think instead of using the Logic noise gates, which are great, but they're not as great as my Slate Digital noise gates, so I will use as many Logic plugins as possible, but I'm going to be naughty for now and use my Slate ones just because they're amazing. So I'm noise gating this kick drum because I want to isolate it. I don't want to have, because we had the guitar amps in the room and the overheads and things like that, there's a lot of bleed coming through those mics. So hopefully when this Slate one loads up, if it's going to, excellent. So ignore that, that's crazy and worrying. You guys won't have that in Logic, but you will have versions of. So I'm just going to bring up a noise gate, and we're just going to listen to the kick drum. And let's mute these guitars. So you guys can hopefully hear that hi-hats coming through there a little bit. Noise gates are one of the only things I actually like to use the presets on, to be honest. I'd never use presets on compressors or EQs, but with noise gates I like to start with something they give me and then arrange it by taste. So can you see the reduction now that we've got in the high end? I think there might be something more we can do. Let's just listen to a few. That sounds really good actually. So if I increase the threshold, no signal is getting through at all. If I decrease the threshold, all of the noise is coming through that we don't want. So it's about finding a fine balance between the kick drum sound and the background noise. So before and after. If you guys are experiencing a bit of lag, just log out and log back in again. It's all being recorded anyway, so you're not missing anything. Yeah, just log out and log back in again if you've got a few problems logging in and with the lag. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so I have just gated the kick drum just so we can hear it a little bit more and hear it without the background noise. So let's jump in and let's EQ it. So what are we looking at now? We're looking at a EQ graphical spectrum. So this is a representation of our individual channel track, and this is our way that we're going to manipulate the EQ for that song. So this is our way that we might want to boost or cut specific frequencies depending on what the fundamental frequencies are of the instrument that we're trying to EQ. So let's turn these on. This is our low end, this is our really low end, this is our bass region, and then we have our mids region, and then we have our highs region here. Now what I like to do is at every possible stage I like to reduce the gain on my plugins. I do this on compressors, I do this on EQs. It's just so I'm not adding unnecessary gain to my channels when I'm EQing. So let's listen to the kick drum. So what I'm doing with the bottom controls is I'm shaping the cue. I could have a very wide cue where I cover a very large amount of frequency range, or I could have a very specific cue where I could have a very narrower band of frequency range. So what I'm trying to do is just enhance the fundamental frequencies of that kick drum a little bit by adding 6.5 dB at 63 Hertz. That's actually quite low, but it sounds quite nice from where I am anyway. Some engineers, now this is just going off the topic a bit guys, but some engineers would say you should never add any more than 7-8 dB of gain enhancement on your EQs, or you've done something wrong. And then you'll watch a video by some massive producer who's smashing it up to 10 dB of gain in the region that they are finding really pleasing, and they're making #1 records. So it's kind of like, you know, where do you draw the line? But really, fundamentally with EQ, you should actually be more subtractive, as in reducing frequencies, than additive, because everything is related, because all of these frequencies in one way or another are related to each other. What you change in one area is going to be the same in what you is going to change something in another area. So it is quite a balancing act. Really, you don't ever want to see mad EQ cuts like this. Mad EQ additions like this, because, well, maybe someone could just type in the chat bar now, what is that going to do to my signal if I was to have an EQ cut that looked like that? Someone might be able to chat in there while bring it back down to some normality. Okay, well the reason I wouldn't want to do that is because I'm just adding loads of decibels to my signal, and that is going to result in me having no headroom on my stereo out over here, and that's going to result in my mix being distorted, clipping, having no dynamic range, sounding squished, sounding squashed, sounding like it's struggling to breathe. So with EQ you should be really delicate where possible, and then as I said about those big producers that are doing those mad EQ boosts, you should do that as well when you feel the need to. But let's listen to the kick drum. I'll do like a quick EQ on how I think it might sound better, and then we'll A/B the two. Someone give me a yes just to let me know, those guys that are still here, that they can hear me and they can see the screen okay and stuff like that, please. Excellent, thanks guys. Okay, so our kick drum's coming in at 9.4, minus 9.4. That was our kick drum before. That's our kick drum now. Minus 7. I don't know if you guys are hearing the difference in that, but for me it sounds a lot more firmer and sort of more like a brick wall kick drum, just like more like, yeah, that's where it needs to be. There's a bit more clarity and a bit more presence in it. Excellent, great, thanks guys. So let's just leave that one there for now and move on to the snare. And we'll try gating it first. It might not need it. Sometimes snare gating just isn't the one, basically. But let's just see if we can clean up that background noise a little bit. So just to recap while I'm loading it up, and I think when I load this up, it's not happy because it probably takes a lot of CPU power. But so far, what I've done is I've just made sure that my stereo output is not clipping. I've added a little bit of gain to my kick drum because I thought the signal was a bit weak. I've gated the kick drum so I could get rid of all of the background noise, and I've EQ'd the kick drum so I can enhance some of the fundamental frequencies and reduce some of the unwanted frequencies. So with the kick drum, I'm loving that sort of 50 hertz to like 90 hertz area, but I wasn't really digging that sort of flappy woolly 300 area, so that's why I did a reduction there. So let's just bring up the old gate for the snare, and again And to make our lives easier, I just want a natural snare deep lead to begin with. So I don't like that because it's actually changed the tone of the snare. It's better. I think I'm going to sack off the gate on the snare. Another reason why is like all of those little intricate little sort of ghost snare note rolls you're doing. I don't really want the gate to interfere with those as well. I'd rather keep the dynamics, so I'd rather sacrifice a bit of bleed to make sure that I'm capturing the whole essence of what the drummer's doing on the snare. If it was just a straight whack, fine, let's gate all of that noise out, but there's a lot of delicate intricacies, hopefully that's the right word, that are going on that I want to capture. So let's EQ that snare. I just changed the shape of that EQ cut there, so use the top one to select your frequency, and then use the second control to select what type of cut that you want, so whether you want it flat or whether you want it really harsh. I want it harsh on this occasion. I don't really need anything under 50 Hertz on this snare track, so I'm going to clean it up there, and I like my snares to sound low, so let's see what we can do. With snares and low end, if you start to push it too, people not seeing that EQ pop up. Let me just bring it up again and see if you can see it. How about now, Farron? No EQ, that's annoying. Okay, I don't know why we're not getting that. Okay, let me just talk you through what I'm doing on the snare track. So you guys were seeing the EQ with the kick drum though, yeah? You can see the tiny one. What about if I okay. How can I get around that? 2 secs, guys. Still nothing on the EQ graph. No. So you guys are seeing both those screens, yeah? The arranged screen and the mix screen. None of them. Hang on. It's just blank. Stop sharing. Present now. A window. I'm just going to try a different option. Yeah, thanks, Farron. I'd love to get... Just let me know if this works, guys. I'm just going to do a different... Your entire screen. How about that? Just let it load up. Is that working for you guys? Are you guys seeing the arrange view and the mix view now? Cool. Excellent. And now if I bring up the EQ on the snare, are you seeing that? Oh, we are back in business. Excellent. Cool. So let's carry on where we left off. So I like my snares low, so that's why I've just enhanced this little low region. Again, it's different for everybody, but think about this EQ spectrum analysis like a mixing desk. So your low end, if you wanted to boost that on a mixing desk, that would be the low faders that are generally labeled sort of like 60 hertz and then like 100 hertz, probably up to like 500. Or look at it like a piano, like a grand piano, where you have your bass notes, low mids, mids, high mids, so on. So again, just for gain staging, I'm just going to turn it down a decibel here because I don't want to just be constantly adding gain to my signal. Let's listen to that snare. So snare before. It's subtle, but I really like the sound of the snare anyway, so I don't really need to do too much to it. So it's a real subtle EQ addition. Right, let's get some compression involved. So I'd rather take the time and do these things slowly one by one as opposed to trying to do a whole mix in an hour. So I'm probably going to spread this out over a few weeks. So we've EQ'd the kick, we've EQ'd the snare. We didn't want to gate the snare because it was going to ruin some of the lovely sort of dynamics that were going on. So let's compress the snare first. And see what we get away with. So what is compression? I think people will tell you loads of different things. In its simplest form, it's volume reduction. It's reducing the signal that is coming over the compressor's threshold. If anything is higher than the compressor's threshold, then it will reduce the signal. But this reduction, this compression, this reduction in signal is so important in music. It's literally used on every track in every possible way. Some people use it really subtly, some people use it really aggressively, some people use a combination of the two. Originally it was for obtaining a stronger radio signal. So you would have your song on a radio that you wanted to broadcast, but you'd need to put that song onto a carrier signal. So they would use compressors to make the song literally be a stronger signal when they broadcasted it. But then engineers were like, wow, if we just put compression when we record, it makes everything sound amazing. And it really, really does. It's one of those topics that you will start to learn about, and then 15 years later you're still like, oh, I'm still learning about this. It's really amazing. But for now, I suppose, just bear in mind we are controlling our output by what we input, and it's a much more smoother, expensive way of doing things than you just literally pulling down the fader. So the best way I describe it for me personally is like, there's 100 different models of distortion pedals, there's 100 different models of keyboards, there's 100,000 different models of compressors. Some are hardware, some are software, some are optical, some are transistor. They all use different technologies to work, and within Logic you have emulations of those compressors. So what we're doing really is allowing some signal to go over the compressor, and then we're going to reduce it, and I'll show you the basic controls of a compressor now. So we find our compressors in our dynamics, and we're going to have a mono compressor. So sometimes you will just hear something that is so smooth and lovely, and you'll just want to add a compressor to it to enhance that smoothness and that loveliness. Whereas other times you might have an uneven signal, where you might have, I don't know, a series of kick hits, and a percentage of those kick hits are a lot louder than the other ones. So you'll want to smoothen out those louder and quieter parts. So it's a way of manipulating audio to make things more even as well. So let's just listen to the snare, and let's just play around with some controls, and then I'll tell you what I'm doing. Sorry, the first thing I should say with Logic compressors is turn auto gain off, just because that's really increasing our signal and it's not giving us a fair representation. So just turn that off for now. Now, when my threshold is all the way to the right, the compressor isn't reacting. Nothing's happening. When my compressor is all the way to the left, my threshold is really reactive. So that's why we have a reduction in volume. Normal signal level, compressed signal level. Now when I turn up the ratio, it's going to get even quieter. What you're listening to there is super compression. Everything is really squished because it can't even breathe, because the threshold isn't allowing anything above it. It's just compressing everything. There's a reason I set my compressors like this. Now I'm going to swing the attack. I want you guys to listen. So, nice long attack. Just think of the snare. Don't think of the hi-hats in the background. Think of the snare. How rich and full the snare sounds there. Sounds very weak and flabby there, and it's not getting through. So the attack is really an important control. You guys would not hear what I'm doing with the attack there if I hadn't put the compressor into hyper mode. So I'd always set the threshold to maximum first. I'd always set the ratio to maximum, and then I would think, I'd be like, what am I trying to do with this sound? Am I trying to enhance something that sounds amazing, or am I trying to even out something that's got some uneven hits in it? Well, if I need to even out something with uneven hits in it, I need to have a shorter attack time. I need to be able to grab those transients quickly and pull them back. But if I'm just trying to make something sound poppin' and even better, I'm probably going to have a longer attack time to let some of that loveliness come through. So that is sort of like a quick short rule of thumb. If you want to be able to control uneven audio signals, you will need a shorter attack time. If you want to make things sound plusher, posher, what we were talking about with compression earlier, you will need a longer attack time. So I personally like the dynamics of the snare, and I'm not really hearing any unevenness in the snare either. So I'm on this occasion, I'm going to use a longer attack time because I don't really want to interfere with Joe's playing. Now, if you've got a singer and they are very, very quiet and then they give a really loud like scream, that's where we'll start to use the shorter attack times to try to tame such a large volume jump. Anyway, back to the compressor. Just sounds really tight. Now obviously we don't want to have a too long a release time. We want the compressor to let go of the signal quite quickly. So imagine that the attack time is the compressor grabbing the signal with the threshold once it's past the threshold, and imagine the release time is how quickly the compressor is going to let go of that signal. So we can smoothen out those release times with the knee, but for now just imagine that attack is clamping the signal and release is letting go of the signal. I am still in hyper compression mode because I wanted to demonstrate to you guys what attack and release do. If I didn't have the threshold to super sensitive, and if I didn't have the ratio to infinity, we wouldn't be able to hear the attack and release controls doing what they do so much. We'll look at release in more detail because I am aware of time as well. But for now, I think let's just pull our ratios back to something sensible, and let's just make sure our compressor's actually doing what it wants. So I know that the compression, we'll talk about it for hours, but what I want to do with this snare drum is add overall about 9 dB of gain reduction, and then I can turn the fader up overall, and then I can have all of that lovely tight compressed sound, but I can have general overall control of it. I could turn it up with the makeup gain, so I could take all of those transients that I've compressed and made smaller and just posher and more tight, and then I could turn them up with the makeup gain, or I could turn it up with the fader. So I'm looking at the moment with this compressor, the Platinum Digital, I am going to try and aim for 3 dB of gain reduction, just because that is going to sound posher than me trying to initiate 3 dB of gain reduction with automation or with the fader. So here we go. So that's crazy. We need to bring the threshold back. No compression. I'm just going to turn things up a bit. Ignore the sort of background noise because we haven't gated it. You might not be able to tell on your monitors, but for me it is subtle, but that's why we're going to add another one on now. So it's better to add, I think, 3 compressors or adding 3 dB of gain reduction than 1 compressor doing 3 dB of gain reduction. So again, I'm just going to set this up again. I'll do this a bit quickly and a bit naughty, a bit more naughty. So all of these compressors here are just representing famous compressors from the past, basically, so you guys can take your pick of whether you wanted a clean sounding modern compressor or more of a vintage sounding compressor that's adding more character. I'll let you guys play around with that for now, but for now we've done the platinum digital. Let's just jump into like a vintage one, and again I want to turn auto gain off. And for you guys that are wondering what the hell's going on here with these compressors, I think once we've stacked 3 up and we turn them on and off, we'll really hear what we're messing with. Sort of rush that one a little bit, but time is of the essence, and we'll just pop one more up on there. The reason that I'm doing it with 3 as well is because hopefully we can really start to hear what the compressors are actually doing to that snare. And let's just try this one. So let's just look at that snare and let's just add them one by one, and we'll just see if things are starting to sort of enhance a little bit more. Are things starting to sound a little bit more pleasing with the EQs and the compressions we've added, or are things actually sounding worse? Hopefully not. So let's just go through. I think it's just sounding posher. There is a tiny little ring that those compressors are showing up a little bit, so I might just adding another little EQ here, if it will let me. And I'm just going to find that ring. Wicked. Right, let's just listen to it in some context, and whilst we're listening I'll add a few little we'll add a few compressors to the kick drum as well. So let's just hear all of the drums. So before, I think those drums are starting to sound really, really where we want them to go. What shall we do next? Let's do the same with the kick drum. And this time I'll do like a 9 dB of gain reduction with the kick drum, and we'll do a shorter attack time and just see if there isn't much unevenness going on, but just for the purposes of the demonstration. Oh, auto gain off, sorry, I always forget that with Logic compressors. Ratio to infinity. So short attack time, longer attack time. I want it to smoothen out a little bit, but I still want to retain the fullness of that kick drum. So before, again, it just adds to that tightness, to that brick wall sort of kick drum where you want your kind of kick drum to be. It kind of puts it into its own zone, its own space, its own. It's going to really cut through the mix in a much more sort of pleasing, posher way that we've done that with the compressor. I don't know what you guys think, but I can really hear what that compressor's doing on the kick drum if I A/B that. I think it just sounds more defined, and it just sounds posher. But again, I'd rather do. I'll tell you what, we'll do it with 2 compressors. So let's do 4 dB of gain reduction on each one. So no compression. Cool. I'll tell you what, because time's limited, let's leave it there on that compressor. One last listen to the drums, and then let's just do some stuff with the guitars for the last like 15 minutes, because I know some of you are itching to do it with guitars, and it's no good just listening to drums all the time because that's not relative for singers and guitarists. So one last listen to those drums, mainly because I'm really happy with how they sound now. We haven't done anything to the toms or the overheads. We'll do that next week. Yeah, I think it just comes alive when we do that. And it just sounds more expensive, more professional, more controlled. Right. Guitars. Let's have a listen to what the guitars are doing. So let's just mute these guys. And unmute his. I'm going to treat these guitars differently. Hopefully you guys are hearing the guitar. The first thing I want to do before it gets to my guitar bus is just going to add a little bit of gain. And I'm going to EQ it. And I'm also going to send it to another bus. And what I'm going to do on this bus is call it guitar amp sim 1. And I will put this to the left as well so it can join it, but I might put it a bit wider. So we're spreading out our signal. So we're panning, I'm spreading out the elements. Some elements you'll generally always want to keep down the middle, like the kick and the snare. But with guitars, most often than not, if there's two guitars, we'll pan one left and pan one right. So we'll do that for now. It might not work, it might work, but we'll try it. So why have I created a bus like this? So I want to send a copy of this guitar signal to another channel, and I want to have independent control over that channel. So bus 6 is here, bus 6, and I am going to turn up the signal level using this green dial. I'm going to turn that up to 0. So now when I play, it's here as well. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the tone that we've got on the amplifier, but I'm also going to add one in that Logic gives us as well. So amps and pedals, amp designer. And we have a lot of different controls here. So I think the first thing we need to sort of work out is what is going to sound good. I want it to be clean, but I want it to be sort of a little bit dreamy, like a little bit spacious, and we can do that with reverb as well. But if we could get something that's just doing a little bit, I don't know, something that's doing a little bit psychedelic is the word I'm looking for. I mean, this is again a problem with Logic, is that you just have so much to choose from. That can become a bit of a chore in itself. So let's just see if we can find something that's going to work. Bear with me a few minutes on this one, guys. Okay, don't worry. I'm going to stop soon and we're going to do questions. So, and before I finish this video, I'll talk you through what I'm wearing. So don't worry, Lottie. And this is this is for some of you guys your first lessons on this. Like, there's no need to panic just yet. But what I've done with that guitar is we recorded it in the studio, and it sounded pretty nice. But I kind of want it to sound better. And that's nothing to do with the playing, that's everything to do with the tone. I want it to sound sort of just more expensive in the mix. So as well as taking that original tone, I've set up a bus, and a bus is like an auxiliary track. It's like an extra copy of that signal, and on that extra copy of the signal I've added an amp simulator. So I've sort of got two now, and I think you guys would hopefully agree with me that the guitars just sound a little bit more fuller and richer and enhanced. So I'm just going to A-B it with the bus now. So guitar on its own. Sounds, oh, I like it, Ben. Thank you very much. Sounds like just a little bit grittier and just a bit more where it needs to be. Maybe we could turn the treble down a little bit on that one. And then of course I could even go in and I could just add an EQ on top of that amp sim and go, okay, let's just sort of make it a little bit more richer in the sort of lower end, and maybe a bit more presence in the 500 hertz perhaps. And maybe we cut it out a little bit here. Would you have the first pedal on in this section, Ben? Just out of interest. Because we could also we could add that in as well. But let's have a quick listen to the other guitar, and then we'll finish up for today. And I'm just quickly going to add another amp into that. So I'm going to create a copy of that guitar, send the copy of that guitar so it's got its own signal out to here. I've created bus 7 here, and this can be second guitar amp sim. And then we could go on here, and we'll do this one a little bit differently. We'll add the amplifier here. And instead of adding the reverb onto the amp, I'm going to add the reverb on quickly here. So we will go down to our reverb, and I'll go Space Designer, we'll go mono. I want it to sound quite ethereal, so I'm going to go for quite a large space to begin with, and then I'm going to reduce the amount. just turned the guitars down because I wanted the snare to remain down the middle. But I personally think that this track sounds way posher than it did an hour ago. And mixing isn't something that should be rushed in any stage, really. It should be something that's enjoyed, especially as you're all songwriters. Mixing is actually as crucial as writing the song in the first place now. Why don't we leave this lesson here, and then why don't you guys all turn your cameras back on and we can have a chat about any questions, and then I can make a list of things that we want to go through next time, and we can see if this was even beneficial, even if we need to do this again. Yeah, give me 2 secs.